the retired police officer who leaked information which resulted in the sacking of Damian Green, liked anti-conservative posts on Facebook. It emerged last night. Retired Detective Constable Neil Lewis, 48, reportedly went online and clicked on the post by a campaign group called Sack the Tories in 2016. The information leaked by Mr. Lewis and former counter-terrorism boss Bob Quick led to Mr. Green, 61, being sacked by Prime Minister Theresa May. It came as the chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation last night joined Mrs. May and Boris Johnson in slamming the two abhorrent retired officers. A number of Tories have rounded on retired Detective Constable Neil Lewis, left, and ex-counter-terrorism boss Bob Quick, right. Damian Green, pictured, was forced to resign after he breached the ministerial code and wrote a letter to Theresa May. Ken Marsh was quick to criticize the men and said that the 30,000 officers he represents respect the rules when it comes to confidential information. His comments come after Mrs. May, 61, demanded that the leaks are properly investigated after her close friend and deputy was forced to resign. Mr. Green was sacked after he breached the ministerial code when he lied about pornographic material being found on his Commons computer. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and now Mr. Marsh have now rounded on Mr. Lewis and Mr. Quick. They both leaked details that pornography was found on Mr. Green's computer in 2008. According to The Times, Mr. Lewis went on the anti-Tory page which celebrated Ian Duncan Smith's resignation in March last year. Mr. Marsh told The Times, "It's unfair and disingenuous that again we are being hauled over the coals when most of my colleagues think that what these retired officers did is abhorrent. We are all privy to confidential information but we respect the rules. All this has done is pit the Tories against the police again. My colleagues are professional and they just want to do their jobs." Mr. Johnson, who arrived in Moscow yesterday, said that he felt there was a vendetta against his former colleague. He said, "I think it was a bit whiffy, frankly, this business with whatever happened with the information from his computer. I don't quite see why that was brought into the public domain in the way it was. I think it needs to be investigated further," as the Prime Minister was saying. It had the slight feeling of a vendetta. The Prime Minister, right, has demanded that the leaked information is properly investigated. Mr. Johnson, who arrived in Moscow yesterday, pictured, said that he felt there was a vendetta against his former colleague. Mrs. May added, "I share the concerns that have been raised across the political spectrum about comments that were made by a former police officer and I expect that issue to be properly investigated, to be taken seriously and to be properly looked at." Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt said questions needed to be answered regarding the conduct of the retired officer after the details were released. He said, "Some of the actions, of particularly a retired police officer, that sit comfortably in a democracy.